Welcome to Love and Leadership, the podcast that helps you lead with both your head and your heart, plus a bit of humor. I'm Kristen Sharkey, a leadership coach and facilitator.
And I'm Mike Sharkey, a senior living and hospitality executive. We're a couple of leadership nerds who also happen to be a couple.
Join us each week as we share our unfiltered opinions, break down influential books, and interview inspiring guests.
Whether you're a seasoned executive or a rising star, we're here to help you level up your leadership game and amplify your impact.
Hello, and welcome back to Love and Leadership. I'm Kristen.
And I'm Mike.
And today we have another LBC Leadership Book Club episode, our third one.
Can we get some LBC music?
Yeah, I've thought about it. Maybe it will happen.
Like a special jingle?
We'll see if I feel motivated.
LBC.
So the book we are doing for this episode is The Coaching Habit by Michael Bungay Stanier.
MBS.
Yes, also known as MBS.
Sounds like a bank.
It does, yeah. So I realized if I went by my initials, like my professional initials, I would be KBS. So I don't know that that's better.
Also sounds like a bank.
Also sounds like a bank.
Which is good. Let's send us your deposits. We will happily process them and invest them, probably in crypto, against the better judgment of my wife, but you know.
Yeah. Maybe the KBS is in my future. We'll see.
I like it.
But yes, I'm really excited to do this episode. I first read this book when I was in corporate America. I actually did a training that went along with it. And I read it again when I was doing my coaching credential. And I would say of all of the books that I regularly recommend to my clients, this is probably the top one because I just find it is so relevant at all different levels of leadership, honestly, both for people who are like first-time managers and then a lot of times senior leaders still who are completely overwhelmed and need to get more things off their plate. Also find this really valuable. So I recommend it a lot. I think it's very easy to read, and I'm excited to do it for the podcast.
Is this the first book you recommended to me?
I don't know.
I'm trying to remember what it was.
I think it was this one. There.
I know. I think this may have been the first one.
It might have been.
Like after our first date.
Well, yeah, because like when we met, you were going through a lot of challenges with delegating and having so much on you too. So I think it was very relevant. Along with Boundaries for Leaders.
I can't remember which one was first.
Yeah. Oh, well.
Anyway.
So yeah, but like we had said with the extreme ownership, after we started with Boundaries for Leaders, Mike picked one, which was extreme ownership. And then I picked The Coaching Habit just because I recommend it so much all the time. So here we are.
Here we are.
And for some background, so MBS he's best known for writing this book. He's written several others. Interestingly, this book was actually self-published and it's sold over 1 million copies at this point, which is definitely a nod to self-publishing, which is cool. He's a former Rhodes Scholar, and he is the founder of Box of Crayons, which is a learning and development company that helps organizations move from advice-driven to curiosity-led. This book was published in 2016, and he's written 4 more books since then. He's a very prolific writer, actually. The Advice Trap, How to Begin, and How to Work with Almost Anyone, which came out last year.
Can I just say, I wish I had come up with the Box of Crayons name.
Oh, for sure.
I still wish that I could somehow expropriate that. It's just the most amazing name.
It's such a good name. I kept thinking about it when I was coming up with my company name. I was like, this is like the perfect company name.
Right. Will they notice if we just name it this?
I mean, there are things like trademarks, so, you know, they might.
So it's a genius name.
Yeah, it's a great name. And yeah, we can start getting into the book. Any opening comments for you, Mike?
I will just say I'm very excited to do this. This is definitely an area that I need to and want to improve in. And yeah.
Awesome. Well, this book is a little bit different in terms of how it's structured. It's not like a traditional chapter structure. He actually bases it around these 7 essential questions where like each question is kind of like a chapter. And then there's also like these 7 quote unquote master classes, which are really just like short best practices for coaching. So as we walk through this, we'll talk about the introduction, and then I put in our outline, I put all the questions together and then all like the master classes together, just because they don't necessarily need to be interspersed within each other. And he starts by talking about how we know coaching is important at this point, but statistically, you're probably not getting or delivering very effective coaching. And his truths about coaching are, it's simple. You can coach somebody in 10 minutes or less. It should be a daily informal act. You can build a coaching habit if you understand and use the proven mechanics of embedding new habits. And he also kind of gets into why coaching is helpful for leaders. And this is why I recommend this book for many different reasons. One is you may be part of an over-dependent team. So this is where you basically trained your team to be overly reliant on you. And there's bottlenecks, and it's also disempowering for them. You might just be overwhelmed by the quantity of work that you have, and you need to focus your time, energy, and resources on solving the challenges that make a difference. Or you might be disconnected from the work that matters. So coaching can be really helpful for you and your team to actually reconnect to the work that has impact and meaning. And I definitely see all 3 of these with my clients and with myself as well.
Well, so I will say, like, when I first read this book, I love it because it presupposes that everyone has talents and abilities. They're very inherent and they're underutilized and they're under-recognized and under-supported. So his whole model is not a control-based model, but a supportive and nurturing one. It made me realize I'm definitely not delivering like effective coaching. I didn't even know what that was in my pedagogical background. I've had very good teachers in different ways, but it was very much like imparting knowledge. It wasn't nurturing someone's creativity or nurturing their own talents. I also will say, it's, as someone who feels like they know a lot, it is very hard to break the advice habit. It's so hard. Leaders, like, you get to your position sometimes by knowing a lot or being highly successful, and that maybe that boosts your ego a lot, and you're like, well, I know a lot, I can. And then at some point you're like, okay, I can share this. Or people ask you, what should I do? What should I do? And it's so easy to give them the answers. And a lot of times those are the answers that are right for you.
Yep.
But they're not the right answers for those people. Or maybe they have better answers or different answers. So I absolutely love this concept, which is why I think coaching is a little misunderstood too. So I don't know. Do you want to give a little explanation of what coaching is?
Yeah. And that actually is an interesting point, because I think this book just jumps straight into coaching is important. It doesn't necessarily, and it kind of defines coaching by walking through these questions, basically. But the core of coaching is asking open-ended questions and guiding and supporting the other person in finding solutions themselves, which is basically exactly how it sounds. So instead of giving advice, which is, as you said, very difficult, I think there's a reason why his book after this is called The Advice Trap, because it's something that's challenging. It definitely activates something in us when we feel like we know something and we get to give advice. I think it also plays into when we were talking about the types of imposters in our imposter syndrome episode, the one that was really based around knowledge, right? Like you're feeling like you have to know everything. So that also feeds into that. And it can be really hard to rein that in. You have to, like with many of the things we talk about, it takes a certain level of awareness.
So I think it can be hard to step back, to let go, and to watch people struggle to move forward. But that's what is necessary sometimes for them to grow. And I wrote down a lot of things in my reaction to this as a leader, like being constantly busy gives you a feeling of importance of like, I belong here. I'm so busy. Everyone needs me. Everyone comes to me. And that justifies my position and my existence. There's like an image painting there. The leader must be the most busy, the most stressed, and the most burdened. And I think the best leaders are like sometimes the least busy.
Oh, yeah.
I had someone describe it to me as like, you're a chiropractor and they come to you and you give them a little adjustment and then send them back on their way. And I haven't been able to do that.
Yeah, that's very inspirational. Okay, so the other section that he gets into before starting into the 7 questions is how to build a habit. And this is the half of the title, effectively, of this book, right? You have coaching and then you have habit in there. So he gives like a primer on habit formation. If you've read any of these books, like Atomic Habits he doesn't mention, but I think that's probably the most popular habit book out there at this point. But The Power of Habit, Tiny Habits, any of these, right? There's not going to be anything new in this section. It's kind of more just like a refresher on like particular aspects of habit formation. But he gives basically a formula that he kind of uses throughout the book. And that is essentially identify the trigger. So figuring out the like when this happens. And because if you don't identify the point where you need to implement it, you're going to forget about it and miss opportunities. Charles Duhigg, who is the author of The Power of Habit, he says there's 5 types of triggers. There's location, time, emotional state, other people, and the immediately preceding action. And ideally, you're combining more than one type of these triggers to create like a very specific trigger. So the example that he gives is when I'm feeling frustrated in my weekly meeting with Bob because he says I haven't really thought about it. So there's 4 different pieces of that. You have an emotional state, a time, a person, and an action. That creates like a very specific situation for you to look out for. And then the second part is identify the old habit, which is like the instead of doing this. And again, the more specific, the better. And then defining the new behavior, which is the I will, and particularly focusing on behaviors that will take 60 seconds or less to do. And then he has a few other things with increasing your chances of success, picking something relatively easy, one thing at a time, so do not try to implement the whole book at once, using accountability buddies or groups, and accepting that you're not always going to stick with your habit. You're going to slip up and just getting back on the horse.
Maybe you could create a habit around when your habit fails.
Create a trigger.
Yeah. So when I do this, then I do this. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. That's kind of the overview he gives. I think there's some more to creating habits than this, but he keeps it pretty focused on that formula for the purpose of this book.
Yeah, habit chaining is extremely effective. I think you can use it in groupings. You can use it for like finding the space in between the space. You know, while you're doing this, you can also be doing that. I can clean the kitchen and work out at the same time. Whenever I start working out, I start cleaning the kitchen in between my sets.
I cannot do that. But he does that, yes.
I just, how you can, I think habit chaining is, Atomic Habits. I think that's the book I read about it.
I think Atomic Habits is the one that talks about habit or habit stacking.
Habit stacking.
Yeah.
Yeah. It leads to automaticity.
It's fancy
That's my favorite word now.
Yeah, you've been using it a lot lately.
It's so good.
Just whips out automaticity just out of nowhere as we go about our day.
When our business cards printed.
Uh-huh.
So back to this section, I really like his plan of like how to start your coaching journey is find someone on your team that's up for the clunkiness of you beginning to coach them. That was actually my leadership moment because as I read through this book again, it was like, I'm not doing any of this. So I extracted the 7 coaching questions and I'm like, okay, I'm going to actually do this. And I kind of did it today. One of my directors is very self-motivated and is down for just down for anything, really. And I was like, okay, I'm going to try this out on him and see if he notices. He did not. And it seemed to go well. Yeah, find somebody that's not going to judge you for your baby steps.
I like it. All right. Well, with that, we can jump into the core of the book, which is the 7 essential questions. And they each kind of have a name, like the blank question, and then the actual question itself. So starting off with number 1, the kickstart question, which is what's on your mind. So he talks about what often happens when managers start meetings. And I think the majority of this book is really around one-on-one meetings. That's where it applies the most. Not that you can't coach in other situations, but a lot of this, I often will use it as this is a good guide for doing one-on-ones as a new manager, for example.
I will also say the things he's teaching you are very much directed at knowledge workers, right?
Yeah, that's fair.
Some of the questions don't translate super well to me discussing with my line coach. What about this was most impactful for you? I don't know, man. I just got to cook the order, So, but you can adjust. But it's definitely for knowledge workers for sure.
Yeah, I think that is fair to say. So yeah, he talks about these 3 tendencies of managers when starting meetings, which is the small talk tango, which is exactly what it sounds like. The ossified agenda, which is a dreary recitation of facts and figures. Very common with standing meetings, especially stand-ups.
That's an amazing word.
It really, yeah.
That's so good.
This is going to be the next word that
so
Mike
powerful.
uses all the time. Yeah.
Okay, fine. I will. Challenge accepted.
Okay. And the default diagnosis, which is you don't talk about what the issue is, you just jump straight into the solution.
Okay, I don't do that.
No, never. So the idea of this question, asking what's on your mind, he says, is a great opening question because it implies let's talk about what matters most. And later in the section, he talks about it working because it's a little pressure release valve. And I find this fascinating because this coaching in general, the way it makes the brain work is so interesting to me. But it basically helps the coachee figure out the explicit thing that they want to talk about that might be influencing the way they work. So the thing that they bring up may not be something they were necessarily thinking about consciously, but that was bothering them beneath the surface.
I love it too, because it presupposes that your team member is going to have a high level of ownership and dedication, and that they're going to be, some part of them is subconsciously efforting a problem with the goal of accomplishing the overarching mission. And then it's your job to just steer them on the way. It's not your job to motivate them to get it. They're coming to you motivated and you're helping them organize their own thoughts.
Yep, for sure. Yeah, I like that. And then he also talks about the difference between coaching for performance versus coaching for development. And I think it's important to note that both of these are important. But coaching for performance is more, you're addressing a specific problem or challenge. So you're coaching on basically focusing on putting out that fire. So you're coaching on the solution to solve one particular thing, right? And then for development is turning the focus from the issue to the person dealing with the issue. So you're focused on the person dealing with the fire. And then that kind of goes further into, he has the 3P models is a place, how to figure out where to focus your coaching. So the 3Ps are projects. So that's basically the content of the situation, often the default starting point for the conversation. The people, which is when you're really talking about the relationships that are at play and the role in the relationship. And then patterns, which is looking at patterns of behavior and the ways of working that the coachee would like to change. And many conversations need to be focused on the project or people level, but he notes the fact that it is important that as a leader or manager, you're having the conversations about patterns that you're seeing so that it is getting to that development level as well. And I think it's a good way to think of it because it's really easy as a leader to just really focus on the tactical piece, the results, what the immediate focus is, but remembering that patterns as a way to refocus the conversation on development is a good tool. And then because he always ends each chapter with kind of figuring out a space for you to write your formula for it. So the typical trigger for this question is going to be like the start of some sort of conversation, somebody coming into your office for advice, for example. And then the second one is the awe question, or AWE question, which is, and what else? And anybody who has ever been coached by me has probably seen this question because it really is a great question. He calls it the best coaching question in the world and says it's almost magical.
I'll ask people this and they won't even notice that I'm like kind of flowing them on. They'll just start talking. They'll keep talking. And then I'll go, and what else? That you can almost keep doing it forever.
Yep.
And you'll maybe see their brain run dry, but they don't notice that you're doing it. They just, because they have these things on their mind.
Yeah.
And they want to talk about them and they want somebody to listen.
Yeah.
And I think this is probably just like psychology where a lot of people just want you to listen and what do they say now? Hold space with them while they work out a problem. And a lot of us go right to like, let me solve your problem for you, which I'm super guilty of. And I guess not everybody wants that. I wish somebody would solve my problem.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, can someone tell me, please, with exact specificity and in chronological order, exactly what I need to do? It's an amazing question. It really is.
It really is. And I think this is one of the things I tell you when you're becoming a coach too, is often like the best stuff, the real meat comes out after the second or third and what else. Because then you're really getting beneath the surface, which is amazing. But he says his 3 reasons for why this question has so much impact. Number 1 is that having more options can lead to better decisions. And we'll do an episode on decision making pretty soon. I think it's in the next couple months. But one of the most important parts of this process, the general decision making process, it gets shorted, is the generating of options. And I love this study that he included. It's a study by Paul Nutt, and he basically examined 168 decisions made across organizations. And he looked at how many options they chose between, among other things. And he found that 71% of the decisions were only choosing between 2 options, so basically binary decisions. And having at least one more option cut the failure rate of the decision in half.
So we're not a political podcast. Right.
But yeah, there's a little bit of bias towards a binary in a lot of places.
Well, it's easy. Yeah. Good, evil, right, wrong, us, them, you, me.
Yeah.
George Washington in his farewell address warned specifically against the tyranny of the 2-party system.
And here we are, 2024. But yeah,
that's amazing. That statistic is amazing.
It's so good.
I've never heard that, but that's amazing. So even having a third one cuts failure in half.
Yeah. But it's so true. And that definitely aligns with things I've studied in my work as well. Because a lot of what, I guess the spoiler alert with decision making, a lot of what I talk about is how the generating of options is so often skipped over in decision making, and improv techniques are really good for the generative part of that, especially. So I love this statistic and I will be using it in workshops and speaking engagements in the future. So that's the first one. We were a little lengthy about it, but the second piece is that it helps you rein in what he calls your advice monster, which we have already talked a bit about. But I feel like calling it an advice monster is very accurate. He actually has a TED Talk on all about the advice monster, if you are a fan of TED Talks. But he also has this haiku in here, which I love. I think in general, this book it's a very easy read. It makes my brain happy because there's a lot of bullets and big headings, and it's very structured, and I just find it very easy to read versus something that's super dense and narrative. Like we've talked about my preferences of reading already. But I love that he has like things like this haiku in here, which is, tell less and ask more. Your advice is not as good as you think it is, which hurts.
I feel personally attacked.
I mean,
also, I feel seen.
This is the hardest thing because there's certain habits that when you become a coach, you are like broken of in order to go through like the ICF credentialing process. And the not giving advice, I think, is the single hardest one. It's so hard. And in reality, day to day, I have to kind of balance, because sometimes it's also about like giving resources and frameworks. But like the core of coaching is not giving advice. It is asking open-ended questions.
The therapist I saw for 3 years in New York, I think my first session I went in and he's like, why are you here? I was like, I want advice. He's like, that's not what I do. And I was like, what do you do? and I think thinking back, like he didn't talk much. He just asked an occasional question, which I probably open-ended question. And now I realize he's just leading you to like introspect your own thoughts. I was like, but what about the advice where you tell me what to do?
Yeah.
He's nope, I don't do that. I was like, what?
Yeah. But yeah, and then the third reason for why the and what else question is so good is that you can buy yourself some time, which is very real.
People will answer. They will keep talking. Like you can run that out for a while.
Yeah, for sure. So his tips for asking this question is ask with genuine interest and curiosity. I think that's important, not just like in a formulaic reason, but being like genuinely interested in hearing the answer. He recommends asking it more than once, ideally at least 3 times, but probably maxing it out at 5. So I guess there is some point where it starts to be like, okay, I'm out of answers. But at least 3 times, rarely more than 5 is what he says. And when you get to a point of like, I don't have any other alternatives or anything else to say on this, like framing that is a point of success. So it's like, okay, you've actually thoroughly thought this through and generated various options or whatever it is that you're talking about. And also just moving on when you feel the energy going out of the conversation. So he recommends switching from, which is one of the few places you'll actually see like a yes or no question being here, but wrapping up with, is there anything else? And then the typical trigger for this question is just basically anywhere. It's so useful, it can be added into almost any exchange, which I generally find to be true. I mean, there's a few exceptions, but I use this question a lot. So number 3 is the focus question, which is what's the real challenge here for you? And the idea with this is, well, we often tend to jump straight into the solutions for things without actually making sure we understand what problem we're solving. So 3 things that often happen are you end up solving the wrong problem. You solve the problem yourself instead of actually giving your team a chance to solve it. Or you don't actually have time to solve it and you just create a bottleneck. So he breaks down this question, like what's the real challenge here? A good question. But basically the real and the here imply that there are a number of challenges to choose from and you need to find the one that matters most. And the for you is what pins the question to the person you're talking about. And he talks a little kind of bit throughout this, just like the power of the word you and adding that onto questions. It's another thing that just kind of lights up the brain.
I definitely noticed that. And I love this question because it also, I didn't really read the part where he's like, oh, it pins it to the person. But I remember, my old manager would do this. He's like, how are you going to solve your problem? I was like, my problem? What is my problem? Like he would really let people like own their jobs and their departments. And he's like, what's the problem here for you? How are you going to solve this? And it was frustrating. But he made problems in my sphere of influence just that my problems. And I think a lot of us are used to leaders just holding our hands through the thing or just doing it for us and making all the big decisions. But yeah, he got really good results from people by making them take ownership. I'm like, hey, this is your department. It's actually your problem.
Yep.
Yeah. Tell me what you're going to do to solve it. What? And now I do that and my life is better. My life is better for it. I still wind up solving a lot of problems, but I also like hand it back to people and be like, you let me know what you need, what help you need from me to solve this problem that's in your area.
It's amazing. I mean, I think if there's anything from this book it shows, it's just the power of just an extra word or two.
Oh my God.
Makes such a difference in the way that people perceive something and the way they process it. So nerd me loves it.
It's super interesting. I agree.
But yeah, he gives some examples of situations where it's helpful to ask this question. One is the case where the person is just listing a million different challenges and they're basically like vomiting all the challenges they're having and they're expecting you to pick out what's the most important. So instead of that, ask them which one matters most. He also talks about coaching the ghost, which I like, but a situation where this person, all they wants to talk about is how challenging another person is, or even like a specific project. But this question actually brings it back to the coachee. So it's like, okay, what is the actual challenge here? And then abstractions and generalizations. So like when you have like big picture conversations that just aren't really anything tangible, this is a good question that actually just grounds it to the coachee and really focuses the conversation. And then the typical trigger that he gives to this question is anytime you find yourself starting to focus on a particular challenge instead of just sitting in the uncertainty of it and giving somebody a chance to work it out.
Yeah, I think people like to hand problems really up the chain of command.
Oh, yeah.
They don't want to. And I don't know if we've been trained that way or it's just, it's definitely like, you know, I come into, here's all these problems that somebody else could have solved that somehow, or, oh no, send this back down to the person that's actually going to handle it.
Yep.
And let them handle it. But it takes emotional effort to take responsibility for something. It's actually easier if you do. It's actually easier to just come up with some ideas and try some things and solve it. But there's an emotional investment that can be a leap.
Mm-hmm. Well, it really fits into like managing up, right? Which I mean, we talked about with extreme ownership. So you, when you're going to your boss, come with a solution, come with ideas or like potential solutions so that you're taking that off of them and then also empower your directs to do the same. So, which you can do through asking the right questions. So 4, the foundation question, which is what do you want? And really listening, he talks about like wants versus needs. So sometimes people say they want something, but there's really like an underlying need beneath that. So trying to listen for that as well. And he gets into the neuroscience on this where it says 5 times a second, your brain is scanning the environment around you and asking if you're safe. And if you're not sure about a situation, your brain is just going to default to unsafe. And we've talked about this a lot. Our brains are wired for survival. So they're always going to err on the side of caution. And
not just survival in an epoch that's about 40,000 years behind us.
Yeah.
Yeah. If it was wired for survival in modern day, you would have very different reactions.
We'd be way more chill.
We'd be way more chill, but we're not. Like everything is I don't know, saber.
At least in like...
saber-tooth tiger, like the email.
Countries, yeah.
Yeah, the email is not actually life-threatening.
Yep, for sure. And I really liked he talks about the 4 primary drivers, which he describes as TERA, because they spell out like TERA, but that influence how the brain is reading any situation. So T is for tribe. So are you with me or are you against me? E is for expectation. So do I know what's going to happen next? Can you read the situation? R is for rank. So do you have a higher status than me? So considering that there's somebody in a position of authority. And autonomy is, do I get a say in what happens? So the reason, getting back to this question, is asking questions like, what do you want, can help increase that, what he calls like the TERA quotient for the other person, because it shows that you care about what they want. So that increases like the tribe part of it. And it also increases their sense of autonomy because they get a say. And also, like, you're letting them say what they want first instead of telling them what they should want. They're feeling like more rank from that as well. So I always like anytime we apply neuroscience
Yeah, when I saw the bullet point tribe, that really made me think that your brain is not wired for modern day. It's wired for tribal existence.
Yep.
Yeah, where your survival depended on your maintaining your status in the tribe, because if they kicked you out, you were going to probably die alone in the wilderness.
Yeah.
And a lot of our behaviors are wound up in that, and we don't realize.
So much of it is
It's crazy, right? We have the internet now, but I'm worried about losing the tribe, which would be like 40 people. Those are the 40 people that you knew on Earth. Total. That's your perspective, like dating pool also. It's like 12 people.
Yeah.
But it affects the way you unconsciously react to situations.
Absolutely. That's why so much, like when we talk about the inner judge and all the different types of it, like so much of it is around like, is this going to alienate me from other people? Like your brain will try to stop you from doing things that it feels like is going to put that at risk, because being out on your own at that point in time was like certain death.
Yeah. Oh, she's coming. Hi, Bezos. In the military books I've read, and a lot of people in the military, they don't want to take risks. They won't rock the boat. They won't put out new programs. They won't really try to reform things because it's actually more dangerous to their career than taking bold action. Because if you fail, you stand a better chance of being cast out than if you just go, oh my God. Hi. Oh, you're beautiful. You're so pretty. Look at you. Oh, hi. This cat does not mew at all. She chirps just a little bit, especially when she jumps.
And then her actual like meow sound is the saddest thing. It's pathetic.
You're so perfect.
This is just going to be a thing with our podcast, is just cat appearances.
They take turns.
They do.
Anyway.
So question number 5, which is, how can I help? And he talks about the drama triangle in here, which is a concept I've heard before, and it's kind of amazing. So basically the idea is that we all bounce around between these 3 like archetypes that all have their own dysfunctions. So you have the victim, who is not taking responsibility for anything. They also don't have the ability to change anything, but it's like the martyr, like, I have no responsibility for this. This is not my fault. And then the persecutor, who feels superior to everybody else. They only trust themselves and have a tendency to like micromanage and bully. And then the third part of the triangle is the rescuer, who is taking on all responsibility to fix things, like feeling morally superior and thinking you're indispensable, but like your help is actually often rejected. And Mike wrote in here, reading the rescuer description, I feel personally attacked.
I feel personally attacked by a lot of these things.
I know. Yeah, they're true. Yeah. He says realistically, like we have tendencies. We each have tendencies in these.
I mean, these are like codependent tendencies from relationships too. Like I'll just take all your problems or my problems and I'll emotionally bond to them.
Yeah. Yeah. But what's cool is that he gives an example of a conversation, which I didn't include here. You can read it in the book, but where basically everybody cycles through all 3 of these roles and it just goes back and forth. It really shows how this can play a role in just like day-to-day exchanges.
Can we pause for a second? Bezos has injured me. For some reason, she's very activated and she, so I'm bleeding a little bit.
Oh my God. Okay. We're going to take a pause.
We're just going to pause here.
Okay.
Right.
So Mike has returned with his finger neosporined from cat bacteria. I would say that Bezos looks guilty, but she
does not.
Does not.
She does not.
Not in the slightest. Like really could care less.
Unrepentant.
Yes, unrepentant cat. Anyway, so speaking of victims and I don't know. So back to the drama triangle. So we can all bounce between all of these.
What if I'm actually a victim?
I think you were a victim of Bezos.
Victim of the cat.
But Bezos is never a victim. So, yeah. But yeah, so he talked about a lot of people default to the rescuer role, where you are constantly leaping in to solve problems and offering advice and taking over responsibilities because it feels good in the moment, but it actually exhausts you and it frustrates the other person. Like he says, rescuers create victims. So the how can I help question is really powerful because it, for one thing, forces the person to make a direct and clear request, but it also stops you from thinking you know best and just jumping straight into rescuer mode, which is useful. He also talks about like a lot of people are afraid to ask this question because it's like, oh God, what are they going to ask of me? If I ask them, how can I help them? What are they going to say? But he just gives a reminder, you have a range of possible responses. Just because they ask for it does not mean you have to say yes.
Yeah, people, you can say no.
Yeah, or you can buy yourself time.
Yeah.
But you can still ask them how you can help them and not necessarily say yes to it. So it can take a little bit of power back there. And the trigger for this question is when you find yourself wanting to jump in and help or give advice, ask instead, how can I help? And then question number 6 is the strategic question, which is if you're saying yes to this, what are you saying no to? And how he talks about let's ban the idea of it's a good busy because busy often actually means you're not prioritizing well. And work smarter, not harder is like a useless thing to say because it's, yes, it's true, but like it's not actionable. Like how do you work smarter?
This is the question too that made me realize this is very much directed at like the knowledge worker. If you're saying yes to this, what are you saying no to? My cook doesn't get to say that. He's got to prep the broccoli, the carrots. He's not saying no to prep. He doesn't get to like necessarily organize his time in that way. Like a Google engineer gets to decide to some degree what they're spending time on.
For sure. But for your directs, for sure.
For sure.
Yeah. But yeah.
This requires like you to have some strategic oversight about like where you spend your time.
Yeah. I guess that's true for this question in particular. It is like a more, you have to have some control over your time.
Great question though.
It's such a good question.
Great question.
And he breaks it down, like, why is this a good question? First of all, ask them to be clear about what are they saying yes to and understanding, like, what that looks like. It uncovers what they just automatically can't do. So, like, that's the things like there's 2 meetings at the same time. You can only go to one of them. But then it also kind of uncovers what do you need to do to make the yes happen? And what do you need to deprioritize in order to accomplish it? So it really puts the spotlight on how do you create the space, the focus, the energy, and the resources needed. I felt this very personally. I am so personally really bad. I'm really good at saying yes to things and then not deprioritizing things. I will say this, I really felt this. But he says you can apply the same 3P model to it. So projects, what projects to deprioritize, what meetings not to attend, for example. People, like what expectations to manage, what relationships did you let go of or let fade. And then patterns, like what habits do you need to break? What old stories or beliefs do you need to update? And he also gets a good tip in here for saying no, which is just to create a third point that isn't the person. So you say yes to a person, but you say no to like a task.
And you have to reach a certain level where you can start saying no to things. And for a while, I would just, anytime anybody sent me a calendar invite, I felt like I had to accept it. And now I don't. I'm like, decline. Come and tell me that you absolutely need me at this meeting, but I can't be at all these meetings. Sorry.
Yeah, and the trigger he gives for this is when you see somebody already overwhelmed, about to add more to their list. Just raise my hand there. Fudging by saying yes to everything when scope creep is happening, or whenever somebody is making a decision to commit to something new. It's like, what do you need to deprioritize in order to say yes to this? And then the last question, the learning question, is what was most useful for you? And this question also gets a lot into neuroscience. It's a lot about increasing retention, creating neural pathways. And when we take the time to actually generate knowledge and find an answer rather than just reading it, memory retention is increased. So he talks about a book called Make It Stick, which had multiple authors, so I don't think I wrote it down. But what's essential is to interrupt the process of forgetting. So to create disruptions that interrupt the forgetting process, because forgetting starts immediately, but reflection is a good way to stop it. And this particular question is good because it frames the conversation as useful. It focuses on one big thing that's worth remembering. It makes it personal by, again, adding the for you. It gives you feedback on what to do more of. It's about learning, not judgment. And it reminds people how useful you are to them, which never hurts. And the trigger for this question is the end of an exchange. This is another kind of core coaching question just for me as well. I ask different variations of it, but I will never end a coaching session without us talking about what were the takeaways. What did you take away from it? What did you learn? Because that process of reflection is just so important. It's a critical part of the process. All right. So now we get into the 8 quote unquote question masterclasses. These are really just short best practices. So I'm just going to go through them. So the first one is ask one question at a time. So this is called question stacking in the coaching world. It is another, I would say probably the second hardest habit to break when doing coaching credentialing. The first being giving advice, because we all just tend to ask questions, 5 questions at once. So this is literally ask one question, wait for a response, ask another question, wait for a response, instead of the 3-part question. Cutting the intro when you ask a question. So not apologizing before you ask, not spending an over amount of time explaining it and setting it up, just getting to the question. But he does say he likes out of curiosity as a lead-in phrase. That's pretty neutral if you need to use one. So out of curiosity, ... And then I love the stop giving advice with a question mark attached.
Oh, I had a good reaction. Not a good, but I had a reaction to this.
You felt, yeah. There's directly giving advice, and then there's sneaky ways.
So I have found a lot of micromanagers, and I have one person in mind, one of the worst micromanagers I've ever seen, but he had developed some kung fu with some steel wrapped in silk about it. And this was exactly what he would do. He would use this phrase to try and hide the control that he wanted to exert on you and make it seem like he was giving you autonomy in a very surface level way. And it took me a while to realize that. And the last question before too, he wouldn't say out of curiosity, but he would say, help me understand or something that. But it was a very threatening, almost legally, he's trying to trap you, help me, and the have you thought of what about to, it's just just tell me you want me to do this, dude. Yep. And just tell me you're controlling and that I'm just your little yellow minion, and that's fine. But it's a sneaky, deceptive, way to couch your controlling.
Yeah, you did have a reaction to that.
Mm-hmm.
I totally get it. I can see how that would be used that way, because it really is it's sneaky giving advice, but it's still giving advice, but in a little bit more of a manipulative way.
Manipulative.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's manipulative.
It's have you tried? Have you thought about this? What about this? It's not a question.
It's not a question I'm so magnanimous, I'm leading you down this, and it's like a puppeteer.
Yeah.
And I
It's also one of those things, as you build awareness for how often you're giving advice throughout the day, watch out for this too, and you might.
Oh, I've totally caught myself doing it, because you want, at some point in this coaching journey, you'll start to want to let people have more autonomy and be hey, that's the right way. And you haven't figured out how to do it yet. And this is a pitfall that you will probably step on very early, because you're trying to let go, but you also think you still have the best advice.
Yeah. Yes. And this leads into, so he talks about sticking to questions that start with what. And I think this is a pretty coaching 101 thing. So I feel this almost should have been more at the top of the book, but open-ended questions, and particularly avoid questions that start with why, because it tends to just put the person on the defensive and it usually indicates that you're trying to problem solve instead of actually exploring. A lot of good questions, a lot of good coaching questions start with what. I also think a lot of good questions start with how, but I think this is more like the starting point for a lot of people. It's like just it's easier to focus on what as what your questions are starting with. He also notes that like if you're not doing the fixing, you don't need the backstory.
That's interesting.
Which is another very difficult, probably habit number 3 that's hard to break when you learn coaching.
I always want, tell me everything.
Yeah. No, that's another one you have to break because you don't actually need this. At some point, you're like, am I asking this to help the other person or am I asking this just for me?
It's like rubbernecking when you see somebody on the side of the road. Like, I need to know everything. No, you don't. Just drive to work, sir.
Yeah.
Like, it's going to be okay.
Like,
you don't
or
have
am I just like buying time? Am I just like filling time by asking about this? Is what I'm asking about actually mattering? So that's a good point. That's built in there. And then get comfortable with silence. This is another one that's really hard when you first start coaching because
Or dating.
Or podcasting.
Anything.
Yeah, you have to get used to silences. No, actually in speaking too. This comes up a lot in speaking. But we tend to like see pauses as something that we need to fill. And silence can be a really good thing. Like it's actually a good signal. If somebody's not answering a question right away and they're really thinking about it, like maybe that's often a good thing. Or if they're responding with something that's like a buying time. So like that's a good question is a response where I like usually know I'm going to get immediate answer from it because it's something that they're really thinking about. So silence is not bad. It's often a measure of success. And then his number 6 is actually listen to the answer to your question. This is a little oversimplified maybe. But yeah, I did like his phrase. He describes it as the wheel is spinning, but the hamster is dead.
Oh, yeah.
So it's basically, yeah. Basically, I think that is like you're nodding and leaning in. You're like giving like the signals that you're listening, but really you're thinking about something else. Like
I don't think I can unhear that.
Sorry to my vegetarian husband. No, it is like a very like visceral.
Yeah, I will remember that though.
Yeah.
Okay, am I really just at the wheel? Okay.
Yeah. And then acknowledge the answers you get. So I think this is really part of like active listening, but also even just things like fantastic, I like it, got it, good one, etc. This is just from an encouragement before you go on to asking next questions. And then finally, the last one is really just a point that like you can use Zoom or email or whatever other form to ask questions. It's not just reserved for in-person meetings. And the closing point for this book is really that coaching is about building a habit of curiosity, which I really like.
I love this. I love that. I'm a curious person.
Yeah, and curiosity is so powerful. And it's something that you can really nourish as a quality in yourself. I know becoming a coach has definitely built up my sense of curiosity. I think like to a point where, you had to get used to it, even just being in a relationship with me, because I will ask questions out of curiosity and you're like taking it as interrogation, right? And like, no, I'm actually just curious.
I was like, why do you want to know this?
Right? Yeah. So I think, sometimes people might be surprised because we often don't approach a lot of things with curiosity, but curiosity is pretty magical.
I agree. Okay, Kristen, what didn't resonate for you?
So I think probably the main thing, I think there was a little bit of coaching 101 stuff missing in here that I actually think was almost helpful to cover before getting into the questions. But probably the biggest thing was just the listening. Like he has the one that's just like actually listen to the answer, but it doesn't really get into what active listening is. So I think that's super, super important, really important part of coaching. So that is probably my main critique of it. But also I will say, I think this is a pretty introductory read. It's really about like developing a coaching style as a leader. So I think people who are reading this with the expectation of learning everything they need to know to become a coach by profession, like you're going to need to read more than just this. Like it's a pretty introductory. But I also, if you are really interested in getting more into the meat of coaching and exploring like some of these situations more, I also recommend The Heart of Laser Focused Coaching by Marianne Franklin. It's a good read, but really I think mostly going to appeal to people who are coaches by profession.
Okay.
So, what about you?
So my least resonant, I kind of had to. So though I love the idea of habit chaining, I found his teaching of it, it's definitely for me out of his zone of genius. And I've read a lot about habits, and it just, I don't know. I worked that in with my other thing that didn't resonate. I found, as somebody who's very like logical and order of operations, I found his presentation of the 7 questions a bit disjunct. Like it took me, and this could be because I listened to the audiobook also. But when I listen to the book, I love lists, but there's so much subtext that comes right away that I felt the questions got lost. And this time what I did, I just used your notes and then pulled the 7 questions directly out and left out all the kind of filler. So I almost feel like he needs better like heading work to be like, this is, the big question, and then here's some of the things that you should know about it. But I had trouble following it.
Yeah.
The first time.
That's totally fair. And I think this is a book, I've never listened to the audiobook, but I would probably assume that it is more impactful to read just because it's just how it's structured. It's really designed to be an easy read, but I can see how that doesn't always translate well to understanding it when it's an audiobook.
I mean, so much really did come through, but just the organization. Maybe I needed to take notes or something, but yeah.
Oh.
And Kristen, what was your most life-changing takeaway?
So this is my 3rd read of this book, and I think I've gotten different things out of it each time. This time, I really enjoyed nerding out on the language of stuff, and I think in particular, the strategic question really hit home for me. I think it really made me think about creating a habit of asking myself this question. This is if you're saying yes to this, what are you saying no to? And so I've been creating a habit of asking myself, like, when I take on something new or make something a priority, like a podcast, for example.
What are you saying no to?
Like, what am I going to
Sleep, for instance?
Yeah.
Eating?
Yeah, like that. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, like really thinking about what am I going to deprioritize? Because something will get deprioritized. It's just this way you're actually saying it out loud and having control over it. So I think that really hit home for me personally. And I think also using it as a question more often with my coaching clients as well. What about you?
So the most life-changing takeaway, your advice is probably not as good as you think it is. Okay, that's probably true. So I find this statement extremely profound, and not just the methodology for growing your workplace team, but as a core concept for breaking the orthodoxy of dogmatic ideologies and our unhealthy reliance on traditional power structures. For instance, religions, political parties, and any other group that tells you how to think. And this leads me to introspect, like, advice is actually a form of control. My favorite thinker, Kongzi, Confucius, he stated that the natural state of a human was fully good and benevolent, and the right way of cultivation was just to nurture that bright inner nature. And I think that's good coaching should be about nurturing someone's inner character and helping them to reveal it to themselves. I think that's like pretty life-changing. I'm not doing any of that, but I want to. I very much want to. It sounds great. So, yeah. I put this into practice a little bit today, and I got interrupted like 8 times during the one-on-one, so I felt like it wasn't very smooth, but it's a very powerful concept.
Yeah. Oh, I love that, like, advice is a form of control.
Advice is a form of control.
It's true.
Yeah, it's true.
Yeah.
I know better. Do it my way. Really? I go to some of the like great composers like Debussy studying at the Paris Conservatory. They hated him. They were giving him Fs, and he left. And he's like, they're educating my music out of me. And he's one of the most unique and beautiful composers ever. And if he had listened to the advice that he was getting, we would not have gotten La Mer. That would be a shame. Everybody who comes before you thinks they know the way of doing it, and they're like, this is the way. Okay. In jiu-jitsu, I was there when leg locks where all of a sudden it was like people started getting into that, and the old guard was like, this is outrageous and this is not the way to do it. But they were getting beat by these people that were inventing new things, or not necessarily inventing, but like incorporating. WC didn't invent the 13th chord, but he was like, this is actually beautiful. And now 120, 30 years later, we're still listening to his music. Thank God he didn't listen to anybody else.
Yeah, that is kind of its own thing, is you as a leader, watch out for how you're controlling people by giving advice, but also watch out for the advice you're receiving from others. When I'm asked a question of like, what advice would you have for people who are starting their own business? This is usually the thing I most commonly say is that when you start a business, there's going to be so much advice thrown at you and so many people who have very strong opinions because it's what worked for them, like what they did. And often that advice is just going to be conflicting. And at the end of the day, listen to all of it, but you only need to keep what resonates with you and choose something that aligns with your intuition and what feels true to your values.
Yeah, I just finished Denise Duffield Thomas, Chill and Prosper. And she really doesn't give that kind of advice. She's like, you have to find your way. Here's some pitfalls that I went through. And it's all about your mind. It's the coaching. Her coaching is about your mindset. And it's very like fundamental. And it's like, you have to find your own message and your own audience and the things that resonate with you. And here's some pitfalls of your thinking that you can watch out for that might be like negatively impacting manifestation of your success. How to get out of your own way. Mm-hmm. That's good coaching, right? How to get out of your own way.
Yep. That's the power of coaching.
So we believe in coaching?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Well, I made a career out of it, so I hope I believe in it. But
it's pretty good.
But it's also a very common topic. And
it's like sometimes I ask you for coaching and you're like, so what about this is most important to you? I'm like, just tell me the answer. What do I need to do? Tell me in exact detail and chronological order what I need. Okay. All right. She's not going to do that.
Yeah. It's like most of the time you need to figure it out for yourself. But as a coach, you can help guide.
Well, and they found, right, in children that are not always presented with the answer, but allowed to figure it out on their own. They have less anxiety. They're more successful. I think they did. I think I saw that in a Netflix documentary last week about dogs. It's our nature to like want to help, but it can actually be counterproductive to the result. Oh, that's very painful.
Yeah. So I think we're going to end this with a little bit of pain, a little bit of very human pain of recognizing that we all have this deep need to give advice. But if we want to do what's best for the people we lead, we have to rein it in. Awesome. Any final words, Mike?
Oh, no, that's enough. I'll just be here with my pain.
All right. We are going to wrap there. Thank you so much for listening, and we will see you next time.
Thank you all.
The Love and Leadership podcast is produced and co-hosted by me, Kristen Sharkey, and co-hosted by Mike Sharkey. Please rate and review us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever else you get your podcasts. We can't stress enough just how much these reviews help. You can follow us on LinkedIn under Kristen Sharkey and Michael Sharkey, and on Instagram as Love Leader Pod. You can also find more information on our website, loveandleadershippod.com. Thank you so much for listening, and we'll see you again next week.